York, and welcome to Carte Blanche, the show where candid conversations about the great city and state take center stage. I am your host, Leila Logisico, and tonight we are going to talk about the most complex, challenging, vexing, daunting, ridiculously, insanely difficult project of the century, my favorite topic to talk about, Penn Station. This show has the intention of sparking something for you, the audience, that can help you understand why Penn Station matters so much and how to make sense of what very much looks like nonsense at this point. Penn Station, in the heart of Manhattan, is a place where over 500,000 people arrive and depart every day. A place people usually want to run away from and where hopes, dreams, and grand plans have gone to die. Today, we have a guest who has played a pivotal role in shaping the transportation landscape of one of the world's most iconic cities, our great New York City. Our guest today is none other than Chris Ward, a man who, as the executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, played a pivotal role in overseeing the transformation of Moynihan Train Hall. He was charged with a mission that involved expanding and revitalizing this iconic transportation hub. Chris understands politics, he understands funding, and ever more important, he understands people. We'll dive deep into the vision, the challenges, and the future of Penn Station. How do we balance the demands of modern transit? What will Penn Station look like in the years to come? How did we get into this mess? And is there hope to get out of it? Stay with us as we give Chris Ward carte blanche to talk about Penn Station and our region's infrastructure. Chris, welcome.
Thank you so much, Leila. Great to see you.
Absolutely fantastic to have you on the show.
Thanks so much.
You know so much about transportation and infrastructure, and my first question to you is there hope that we're going to get out of this funk with Penn Station? It seems that we've been talking about it for, 60 years, quite frankly, since the original was demolished. Plans have come and gone, and it looks like every time a new plan comes on the docket, it has another zero in front of it, or it goes from millions to billions. Are we going to get there?
Well, you're absolutely right about how long this has taken, and that is a challenge in your introduction, leading me back to the time that I was at the Port Authority and even before. This has been a challenging project, but I think something this time is fundamentally different, and that Sandy, for all of its destruction, actually did create an opportunity for us now to reimagine Penn Station. And the gravitational pull of replacing and repairing the existing Amtrak New Jersey Transit tunnels and building 2 new tunnels, critical for bringing in all of these passengers with the federal funding that Senator Schumer and President Biden has provided. That catalyst alone, I think, changes the dynamic this time. Before, we were all struggling to candidly cobble together funding, to find the streams, to find where the Port Authority might help, where the MTA can help. This time we're dealing with a very different landscape. That's not to say everything that you've just summarized remains true, and we face an incredible challenge with all of the things that you just referenced. But this time, the tunnel's going to get built, and when you're building that tunnel, something has to happen on this side of the river. And now our challenge is, as a city, is to create a hierarchy of needs to really make that tunnel as much as we want it to be. So I think it's different, but the challenges are exactly as daunting, maybe even more so, as you referenced, Leila.
So just to orient the audience a little bit, as you said, Sandy caused tremendous damage to the tunnel that currently exists, that is, 100 plus years old under the Hudson River. And, it was decided 10 years ago that to repair the tunnel, they basically would have to create 2 additional tunnels so that they could decommission the existing ones, fix them, and then bring online 4 new, 4 total tunnels.
Exactly.
At the same time, when that project went through, it was a redundancy and resiliency project. It was never meant to be a capacity expansion project. And this is something that is very critical because today we have, and once again, just to orient the audience a little bit, we basically have a tunnel project that seems to be funded and moving forward, largely thanks to Senator Schumer, who I think has been just, single-handedly, beyond obsessed in
Exactly.
making that happen.
We owe Chuck a lot.
Oh yeah, it's just wow, what an accomplishment. Then there is the reconstruction of Penn Station itself.
Exactly.
It's a dump. It's a rabbit warren when we want to be pleasant about it, but it's the nicest thing we can say. Then there is a capacity expansion project that Amtrak seems to favor, blowing up, like 2 city blocks south of Penn Station to make way for another, 10 tracks, possibly
Exactly.
mostly for New Jersey Transit. And then separate of that, there is also a project that was introduced by Governor Cuomo to basically blow up the entire neighborhood and put up 10 super tall towers,
Right.
which quite frankly, it's still questionable whether that has anything to do with transportation. So maybe we can start with, the Penn Station expansion, which I think is really, the critical part where we need to increase the capacity.
Exactly.
I think that there is consensus on this question.
I believe
right?
so too, yeah.
Talk a little bit to us about why it is important to actually increase the capacity.
Well, no doubt, this region, for all of its challenges, will face the challenge of growth. Northern New Jersey, in particular, which in some sense is the next borough of the city of New York, will see, as we've seen over and over again, tremendous amount of expansion. I mean, the economy is facing some challenges, obviously, but with that growth, it's going to require more and more capacity to bring that population into New York City. And the 2 existing tunnels that will get repaired will then be inadequate. And the city can't grow without a workforce that can get into not only Manhattan, but into the Bronx and into Brooklyn and Queens. It doesn't have to be a Manhattan-centric approach. So for that alone, the future of the city, if we don't build additional capacity, mostly to eliminate cars also because of congestion, the city is going to choke on either its traffic or it's going to choke on the lack of an ability to grow. And those 2 additional tunnels are our growth factor. And so when you think about preserving what we had, maintaining it, adding capacity, you're then left with, okay, once those tunnels are built, where's the station that's going to absorb them? How many trains can we run through those tunnels? How frequent will they be? How many passengers are we carrying? And therefore, what should the configuration of a new station look like? You can't have the tunnels without a station. And the one thing that I would really like to talk with you, Leila, for the community in particular, is the issue of the tunnel depth and how the tunnel comes into the back of Penn Station. Because a lot of people are still in the old world, the unfortunate old world that we lost, which was the ARC project that Governor Christie moronically killed, perhaps the worst infrastructure decision ever in the history of the United States. That project would be built, it would be underneath the station, and we would have been well on our way.
Yeah. So I just want to challenge a little bit, because I love getting into these rabbit holes with you. It's just we can go really deep into those super nerdy things.
Okay.
On the capacity increase, isn't it true though that just because we're creating 2 additional tunnels, given that those tunnels are coming from tracks that already exist in New Jersey and that these tracks are not increasing, it's almost like you're creating a spur on the highway and therefore you're not increasing the capacity. Another way of saying it is that the passenger who boards their train in New Brunswick, whether there are 2 or 4 tunnels, they will get into Penn Station in the same amount of time at the same speed and with the same frequency of trains.
Well, of course, I mean, that's a sort of physics. The challenge is, and this is really what I think is one of the things that's been vexing this project as well, while that's a truism, the productivity of how platforms and tracks are used within the station and the dwell times of the trains that are there, passenger unloading strategies, sequencing of the suburban trains as they access those tunnels, again, for the maximum amount of productivity for moving people in and around the region is the priority. So yes, you're right. You would want to have a multi-service train network in New Jersey feeding into this capacity. That's another whole question. But we would be foolish if we didn't realize that those 2 new tunnels do provide more capacity, and if we can design the system of track utilization, of platform utilization to the highest and best commuter value, we will have achieved something great.
Yeah.
It might not be perfect, but it'll be great.
Yeah. I think perfect is not part of anybody's vocabulary at that stage, right?
Yeah, that's not coming up in this project, Leila. You're true about that.
So, are you, by saying what you said, making the case, and certainly it's a case that I have been convinced has value, is that through running is actually a great way to increase the ability to move trains through the region, because with through running, and just to explain a little bit what it is trains arrive into Penn Station, passengers are already on the platform waiting to board this train that comes in. Passengers exit the train, new passengers enter the train, and the train continues on to, let's say, Long Island.
Yep.
Is there merits to that?
Okay, so here's the thing, Leila, and this is carte blanche. So let's get Leila and Chris get into this here a little bit. Yeah, there's value to it, no doubt. But the reason why through running is critical as almost an intellectual proposition as we're evaluating what will be the future of Penn Station is exactly what you put in the middle of it, is how do we maximize the value of the platforms and the tracks? What through running allows you to do is to reality check or value check certain assumptions on how New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, in some respects, the MTA are operating this center. Mm-hmm. What that gives you is a way to say, are we getting the most out of what we just built? Through running is not going to, though, be a panacea for the challenges of what the station needs to be and how large and how it gets configured. Moreover, the challenge with through running, and you mentioned Paris as a perfect example. If you look at Paris, which unfortunately New York didn't do, but I think Paris has 7 major train stations ringing the Metro Paris region. And with that, you have a capacity to organize trains in a network which is far more expansive than what New Jersey Transit has. To your point earlier, there's only 2 tracks coming up out of New Brunswick. So you're not fiddling around with moving the trains that Europe is so masterful of and that Europe's had. So we need to think about through running, but through running is not going to solve the problem of the station. And the other problem with through running is those trains, if they can't be constantly moving, have to go somewhere. And, that means you're going to have to build storage yards for trains in places where they haven't been before. What I like about through running, and the people who've been really driving that, let's use these ideas to really scrub in an intellectually, public policy, honest way to say this is what you get out of through running. But let's not ignore the fact that through running has major implications for land use east of the Hudson River, major implications for cost, and then, in fact, the configuration of the station itself is going to be dictated by how that works. But I will say, I'm not a through running solves this Penn Station problem advocate.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I don't know that I qualify myself as such either. But the other thing that through running offers that the other plans don't is increased connectivity. I have to say that the New York metro region is quite the feast, because you have
a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
The state of New Jersey, the state of New York, the MTA, Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, the federal government, New York City,
it's
which
not
at
for a
times
lack of politics, Leila. It's not for a lack of politics.
So that's actually the good segue. How do we get the regional network idea to take a little bit more of center stage?
I think that's really, to me right now, given the history, given the current situation, and given some of the events that have been occurring over the past year or so, I think leadership is probably the most critical question right now. That in some ways, whatever these operating entities are, and you just went through all of them, there's something fundamentally wrong. I mean, this is not an integrated team which is delivering a massive project for the next century. This right now looks like bureaucracies fighting over turf, bureaucracies fighting over, in some cases, reputation, bureaucracies fighting over the politics of scarcity because none of them have enough money. And in introducing this subject at the top of the show, you said, will we ever see a way out of it? And I think the governor, and I think both governors, and I think the leadership of the transit agencies need to acknowledge that this is a failed model now, and that we need to almost re-scrub it and put together a new formula with the political leadership, with the buy-in from the governors, with the right people representing the stakeholders. And it's maybe not even the executive directors of the New Jersey Transit or the MTA or Amtrak. Maybe it's
So are you calling for a Penn Station czar?
I'm calling for, yes. I guess what I'm calling for, I hate the word czar, but what I'm calling for is some entity that has the capacity to cut through what's created such a level of confusion and uncertainty. New Yorkers are growing. We're always cynical, almost to a fault. But boy, we are getting so cynical about public infrastructure, so cynical about our ability to deliver stuff.
You know, from the outside, there is an element of almost, absurd theater. It's almost like a buffoon farce.
Yeah.
Why are we where we are? Is that, what makes it so intrinsically difficult for all these agencies to work together and talk to each other?
Yeah, I think, let's start with that one, which I think is the most important one. I think the politics of scarcity, the lack of funding, unfortunately breaks down cooperation as people begin to think, entities, bureaucracies, begin to think we better get ours because there's not going to be enough to go around. And so therefore, you take a rather narrow parochial perspective. The region has this commonality of problems, commonality of needs, and yet lacks the commonality of purpose to solve that kind of problem. And that's what I'm sort of coming back to, that unless we can find that commonality of purpose, all of these things that have now gotten so personal, so controversial, so embedded in crusted bureaucracy, unless we have a new broom almost sweeping and saying, let's not start entirely again, but let's take all that we've done, put a new delivery team together with decisive leadership to cut through this. Otherwise, we're going to miss the tunnel. We need to start again and put together a team that can combine the right people, the right decision-making for the issues that you raised.
So who would that be?
See, if I say anybody, then when I walk out of here, they'll run me over with a car because they'll say, why did you ever suggest me? I'm not going to say it's any one person. I do think when you think about, a project like this, picking 4 or 5 people who've done large projects, who are trusted by the governors, who are, facile with, with numbers, facile with these kind of questions, and really put a leadership team together of 4 or 5 people that are charged with a clear metric delivered project that marries the tunnel with a station that is the best that we can put together given the limitations you've already raised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a little bit about Madison Square Garden, another big limitation in this whole area.
What an incredible opportunity that would be to completely reimagine what Madison Square Garden would be. And New Yorkers need to remember, Madison Square Garden has not always been where it is today. So it's moved before, and that's why there's a Madison Square Park that is downtown. So there've really been some, beautiful, Alex Washburn obviously has put together some incredibly compelling visions for what the garden could be if you could move it. And if you had that kind of fiscal fortitude and then land use fortitude and then a partnership with the Dolans, So much like your question on through running, let's really stress test moving the garden. What do you get if you move it?
So, so let's look at the numbers.
Sure.
According to ESD, state agency, they're telling us that moving the garden and reconstructing Penn Station would cost $8.5 billion with a B. Just reconstructing Penn Station with the garden in place would cost, according to the MTA, sort of like sister agency, same difference, would be $7 billion. Aren't we better off getting it right? And if we are going to blow $7 billion, it's a lot of money. Shouldn't we really get something that can accommodate the growth? Because we're not going to be doing that every 20 years. Once we spend those $7 billion or whatever it ends up being, we'd rather get it right.
I disagree with you a bit. Not entirely, but a bit.
Do tell.
You're talking about open heart surgery in the middle of Manhattan on 34th Street And at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, one, is that number really realistic? Two, what are the practical timing issues for land use delivery to move a garden? And then is all of that worth it? Because you want to get Penn Station right. And is it worth it that, the perfect is the opposite of the enemy of the good? And then if Penn Station isn't perfect because the garden stays there, how do you make the best out of what you have with the garden, and what can you do with the existing garden?
So let me ask you about another plan that is talked about a lot these days, the ASTM plan.
Sure.
Italian company, and they came up with this vision that they want to rebuild the existing Penn Station. They would take the Hulu Theater that currently belongs to Madison Square Garden, that is integrated into the building, and then they would transform it into a grand entrance on 8th Avenue. What is your take on this plan?
Well, again, kudos to the team there. Pat Foy, who became the executive director of Port Authority after me, and then ran the MTA. Kudos for Pat to be really thinking outside of the box and problem solving. And bringing private equity into infrastructure projects is a future. It's not the market that everybody thought it would be, but it's coming. It's a very creative way to solve problems. We did it. I did it when I was at the Port Authority, and good for Pat and Peter and his team. But having said that, they do need to get paid back. So it's not free money. It's not like federal money or what Senator Schumer's gotten us.
So this is known as a P3 model. So this public-private partnership. I mean, there are many flavors of P3s.
Right.
So this one, basically, in essence, they would get some federal funding. They would apply to some federal loans that are very advantageous. They would put equity into the project. So they would put some of their own money into it, and then they expect to have the concession on Penn Station for 50 years. And they would expect, payments over the course of those 50 years. But at the same time, it also means that, capital comes at a premium, as you said. It's going to be technically more expensive than it would if it was fully funded with public money.
Right.
But at the same time, we know that MTA has had a trend of actually going over budget quite dramatically. So how do you look at this equation? Aren't we better off actually, agreeing that it's going to cost more, but at least it's capped?
Well, two things about the financing, and a couple of things about the MTA and putting them into this equation, and how they've had their concerns about bringing ASTM into the project. So when the Port Authority did the P3 on the Goethals Bridge. What we did is we couldn't afford, because we didn't have the money today. We knew we'd have it in the future, 10 years in the future. So we borrowed money, 1 or 2% interest, very, very cheap, built it in a timely fashion to solve the health, safety, mobility issue, and then we paid back the concession which built it. And like ASTM, it's that long-term responsibility for the asset, which is really where they end up making their return on their investment. So you're right. They are bought into that. People need to understand they're going to be there for 50 years, and they make their money over the duration of that, and it really comes down to how smart and operationally efficient they are. So what I say is let's all make sure that the best money, and what I mean by best is the most efficient money, the federal money, gets spent in the way that gets us the most benefit for the public. Ridership, mobility, capacity, all of that. And that's what ASTM is asking us. Do we want to build something grand using long-term financing with an availability payment by the MTA and the public agencies 7 to 10 years from now? Do we want to use that money to recreate that? That's a perfectly legitimate question that we should really, really be answering. And ASTM should be a part of it, no doubt. And private sector rigor is something that the United States needs to bring into our construction practices, because public sector construction has not had the exemplary record we'd all want it to have.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you look at the cost of building infrastructure here in this country compared to other countries everywhere around the world, even, Tokyo, that is, extremely expensive, the US is 10 times more expensive.
And let me give a real cautionary tale here, and I'm not having run a large agency, I don't want to criticize the MTA, but we have to take a lessons learned from all the things that went wrong with East Side Access. And whatever was wrong with East Side, the number one thing was wrong was its organization for delivery. Coordinated between Metro North, Long Island Railroad, and all of those bureaucracies within the MTA.
I mean, you think it's the MTA. It's not even like two different agencies.
It's not the way it worked. Wrong time, wrong project, and that drove that project price up exponentially by the lack of thoughtful coordination between Metro North and Long Island Railroad.
And yet it looks like, we heard recently of new numbers that, became, known for the expansion of Penn Station. So we used to believe that it was a 12 billion project, and now we're hearing that it's going to balloon to 17 billion. And we have not even started the design.
But Leila, that in and of itself is a daunting fact, that somebody out there in this whole world is leaking information and putting out partial reports. It's just emblematic of this breakdown in the coordination and cooperation amongst the critical agencies. I mean, we are literally watching day to day a catfight amongst these large agencies on the most critical project. And this whole battle of, is it 17, is it 12? Who released this, who didn't release it? It's just kind of discouraging because that's the team that's delivering it, and they're not acting like teammates.
But at the same time, Chris, what is the issue? Is it that someone leaked it, or is it that it is ballooning? And certainly as someone who's just interested in this issue, I fell off my chair. 17 billion to me is like, it's non-fundable.
Exactly, and the reason why that's bad is, and I couldn't even tell you who leaked it, but somebody leaked it. And the reason why it's bad is because, one, it was incomplete. The study wasn't done. It hadn't been really finished in its entirety. So somebody hadn't gone back and done, the reality check of what were all the assumptions. So it was incredibly debilitating. And, you read it and I read it, and we might be a couple of the more knowledgeable people on where Penn Station was. By the time I was done reading that article, I was completely lost. I didn't know really where we were and what we were saying in the conclusion of it. It was almost you couldn't, if you read through running and then read that article, you'd have no idea what it was. So I'm just saying, 17 billion, what are we talking about here now in terms of cost? Two, the fact that we had to see the $17 billion figure in such a, contentious political environment is not a framework for success going forward, is all I can say.
Yeah, no, very, very, very true. Chris, I would like to watch this incredible video with you. This clip epitomizes the saying, when there's a will, there's a way. This happened 8 years ago at Shibuya Station in Tokyo. Let's watch together.
慌てることなく作業が進められるように、よろしくお願いします。
You wonder how many people were involved? 2,000?
Yeah, I think the little description says 1,200.
1,200?
Which is amazing.
Absolutely remarkable. I mean, I think that is one of the great engineering feats and an aspirational goal that, you know, New York and New Jersey have to begin to emulate. The world, you know, this isn't like building, you know, the subways in the 1800s. The land use implications, the community impacts, the environmental consequences of all of that is so enormous, and it's only the kind of fully integrated team delivery on a multi-layer basis that gets you these kind of projects in this dense environment. And that's what Tokyo was able to prove. And we just do not seem to have that delivery mechanism for infrastructure here in the United States. And here in New York and New Jersey, as you've just now listed so many times, that is not the MTA, New Jersey Transit, and Amtrak working together to build a new Penn Station, unfortunately.
Are we going to get there? Could we get there?
I think we could. I'm maybe my curse in public life is I'm always usually optimistic. I mean, again, I think the driver is the tunnel. The tunnel's funded. The driver is the economic vitality of northern New Jersey and the 5 boroughs here in Manhattan, here in the city. That must drive a change that gets this thing done, and we don't make the mistakes of the past. So yeah, I'm going to remain optimistic, Leila, and say with all that the President and Senator Schumer have done to bring us the money, we will have to rise to the occasion, and I think we will. I think it's going to require leadership from both governors to really be honest with the public and say, you know, we thought we were embarked on a particular strategy. We've heard a lot of different things, but we're clearing the decks now, and we're standing up, and these are the people who are going to deliver. And the muck comes out of that tunnel in 2020 in 1126. So that's not that far off. So we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And it looks like, you know, we need to get to terms with the fact that New York is not competing with New Jersey. You know,
No.
the region is competing with Tokyo.
Yeah.
You know, this is where the economic competition is.
And in fact, you know, New York, and this is why it's so sad right now that we see these two governors, these two Northeast Democratic governors fighting the way Governor Murphy is with Governor Hochul and the MTA over congestion pricing. That is not our future, fighting over things where we have the same common problem. As I mentioned to you earlier, the future of the city of New York is tied directly to low-cost, moderate housing starts in northern New Jersey with a commuter mobility, whether it's bus or whether it's train, bringing new people into the economy, into the city of New York, given the cost of living in the city of New York, given the transportation challenges to deliver. They're our 6th borough. We are not only joined at the hip, we are the hip.
Yeah, totally. So you know that the New York region in commuter rail moves approximately 1 million people per day throughout the region.
Yeah.
Take a wild guess. How many people does Paris move?
In a day?
In a day.
We're 1 million?
7 million.
Paris does.
Paris does. The Paris metro region moves 7 million people.
But that's
throughout the
including
region.
all the regional train systems as well.
It's the regional, you know, it's your equivalent of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut.
Yeah, well, you know, we chose cars 100 years ago and paid the price for it. Europe, to its credit, didn't, and built an incredible rail network that Paris is probably the jewel of all of them after Leipzig and East Germany fell apart. So no, Paris is the model without a doubt. In London,
but it was necessity that drove it.
Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to argue here.
Gas was expensive. You know, we entirely rely on exportation for gas, and therefore the automobile model, you know, was going to be too expensive. So,
and I think hopefully that era is coming to an end for the United States, and that we recognize it, and that we're not building for cars, that we're building for other forms of mobility. And that's why, again, I remain optimistic that if you're going to build a beautiful train tunnel, 2 of them, repair 2, and bring that modern world of mobility and train, shame on us if we can't figure out how to do the right thing on this side to absorb all the traffic and pivot off it to create a real partnership and an economic linkage between northern New Jersey, mid-New Jersey, and the 5 boroughs.
yeah. It's that time in the show where we get fast and curious. We are about to embark on a quick quiz, and I am excited to have our guest Chris Ward here with us. Chris, are you willing to play with me?
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Awesome,
Cool.
fantastic. So get ready for a lightning round of questions where we'll dive into various aspects of transportation and infrastructure. Chris, I'll fire away with some questions. I will start the sentence, and you will finish the sentence. You ready for the challenge?
Bring it on.
All right.
Okay.
Demolishing the original Penn Station was a tragedy, but
History presents its opportunities. Terrible, terrible tragedy, but we find ourselves now at the beginning of a whole new era of transportation, a whole new era of technology, and I think one of the most exciting things is a whole new era of design and of architecture and of a new whole form of expressionism that can recreate what was beautiful and fantastic for the Beaux-Arts Penn Station of that time. Tragic we lost it, but let's take the genius of design and architecture today, which is flourishing everywhere, and bring that to the new Penn Station.
yeah, for sure. Madison Square Garden doesn't want to move and relocate, but
Madison Square Garden will do what they want to do, which is in their own self-interest. And the question is, how does the city create an environment that Madison Square Garden does what's best for the city, and at the same time allow the garden to be the garden? But the garden should not be driving this project.
infrastructure is not sexy, but
But I love it. It is sexy. Of course it's sexy. I mean, what do people complain about the most after the weather? They complain about their daily life as it relates to infrastructure. They're complaining about roads. They're complaining about their commute. This is on their mind all the time. Do they love it? Is it a sexy relationship that they're saying I'm getting satisfied? Maybe not. But it's a relationship that is there granularly and sexy every single day, and people love talking about it.
yeah, no, that's true. Tax exemptions make no sense, but
Well, you never want to give away money when you don't have to, and that's the biggest thing. And there are a lot of times where we've seen, particularly, and this is the troubling cloud that hung over Governor Cuomo's original idea for Penn Station. When does a tax exemption effectively become some form of long-term subsidy investment in a private sector operation that does not yield the public benefit that you want? On the other hand, a tax break, which we do all the time, I mean, let's be candid, tax breaks can be an effective way to stimulate a dormant part of the economy because, for a variety of structural reasons, you can't dig your way out of it with private capital. Private capital can be dynamic, but it doesn't necessarily go to the public projects that you need, and that's when some form of tax exemption or public subsidy can, in fact, be used, I think, in a thoughtful way.
I have a follow-up question on that.
All
But
right.
let's finish
Good.
this little quiz.
All right.
Everybody agrees that we need a new Penn Station, but
we can't afford to tear ourselves apart by thinking we all know what it should be. The point is that there has to be soon, based on all the studies and all the information, a clear consensus, and we have to stop shredding positions and parties and attitudes and come together and know that not everybody's going to get what they want. Will the garden get what they want? Will ASTM, will everybody get what they want? Will the MTA get? Probably not. But everybody's got to leave that ego at the door if we're going to be successful.
federal funding is available for our infrastructure projects, but
But let's make sure we spend it in the most effective way. This is President Biden, let's be clear. This isn't a political message, this is history. President Biden has passed now probably four of the most transformative bills in the past 150 years of the United States, since the Marshall Plan, so it's not 150 years. But he has put together an amount of funding for America to redo itself in a way we've never seen before. And that is a game changer for how we think about what we're building and what the future is. And if we squander it and we don't use that money to the highest and best possible use, this historic President Biden will be deeply, deeply disappointed because he wants to deliver those benefits with that money for not only New York and New Jersey, but for everybody else who can be part of those four incredible infrastructure, climate, transition deals. Amazing.
so actually President Biden's nickname is
Amtrak Joe.
Amtrak Joe, but
But Amtrak is slowly coming out of the chrysalis that Joe knew it could be when he would ride it every night coming back from the Senate. I think people are beginning to see that Amtrak is changing and is becoming the kind of service that one would expect. It's going to be a while before it gets there. I think turning around, just like you said, the Northeast Corridor is critical for their credibility. I mean, why? I mean, I hate to say it, as much as I take Metro North upstate all the time. Why, when I travel on a train in Switzerland, let's say, the bathrooms, the accoutrements, the way the trains are run and how it's run is just night and day. So there's work to be done.
Through running is the norm everywhere in the world, but
let's, if it's the norm, let's stress test it here and get the most out of what through running could do. But let's not turn through running into the holy grail that we have to fund it regardless, because it might not, at the price tag that it's potentially going to cost, give you, on a cost-effective basis, the kind of returns that you want. But again, and I keep coming back to this, let's stress test it. Let's find out. So the public then goes, they're building what's best for the public, not worrying, is this a land grab by a real estate developer? Is this a private sector, investment where they're going to make money? The public deserves to see and understand what's getting built there.
America is not enamored with rail, but
it's going to have to be. If we don't, seriously, from a both commodity perspective and moving goods, we have to learn how to get trucks off the road. We have to find out ways to use the rail system. And then last, as we were just saying, this region was based on a 19th century cost model that is now completely out of date. You are not going to be able to raise tolls on tunnels and bridges. Fares are reaching now their human tolerability. It's too destabilizing. So you need alternatives. And you need alternatives to get people out of their cars so they're not paying tolls. And you need alternatives for people to get to their work, which is not costing them so much money that they have nothing left at the end of the week.
Yeah.
We might not like rail, but it better come because we need it fast.
So I think that we also need to, just market rail a little better. Nobody is doing marketing for rail. Nobody is selling it to people. And, the reality is that people are not going to get off their car. The car is extremely seductive.
Exactly.
It's just so comfortable, convenient, secluded, gets
Safe,
the job
in your own
done,
mind?
safe-ish. Actually, it's not safe when you look at it.
not true.
It's the
Fatality rates
highest
on it.
cause of
True. Well
fatalities
said.
and
I was wrong.
in mobility. But people don't register that.
Right.
They think about, oh, the train sucks, it's late. It's like, well, actually, you're late in your car too. Just that
No,
you
exactly
were stuck
right.
in
You can
traffic.
sit for, you can sit in there. So there's the other thing.
But it doesn't register the same. But the reality is that people are not going to get off their cars until the train becomes this amazing thing, which is what you see in France. You board the TGV. It is high speed. It is super comfortable. You are, at grade. There's not one step. In Switzerland, not one step. You get out of the Geneva airport and into the town, and you carry your huge suitcase. Not one step that gets in the way.
No.
It's amazing, and that's but for people who have mobility issues, it's amazing. It's remarkable.
It's remarkable.
We're going to have to bring the train to this level.
We're going to have to. That's what I was trying to say about Metro North. And again, going back to, and I'm a big advocate, and kudos to Lee Sander when he was running the MTA, recognizing that through running, recognizing that these suburban rail systems like Metro North are the driver. They extended Metro North up to Wassaic, and it's created a new economy up there. But if you put a European in a Metro North train and told them it was 2022, they would be shocked.
Yeah.
I mean, if the bathroom on a Metro North train doesn't look like Rikers Island, I'm not sure what analogy you'd come up with. So something has to be done. But look, the MTA does not have the money to do that kind of modernization. And that's why, again, going back to Senator Schumer and Joe Biden has given us an incredible gift. Let's spend that money to make what the public needs most accessible.
So I have a follow-up question on the tax exemption.
Oh, sure.
Tell me why anyone can make the case in favor of the tax exemption, because in essence, isn't it entirely against the capitalistic values that the market has to, regulate itself? Why do we give tax exemptions?
Well, okay, let's do the perfect example. In the United States, basically, the New Deal is based on the notion of tax exemptions in the sense that you are acknowledging that the market, which Herbert Hoover thought was going to solve all of its challenges and problems, and that the Depression and the recession, that capitalism has to solve it. And if you go to save capitalism, then you're not saving capitalism. The point is that now we live in a much more integrated public-private financial market, and where tax exemptions, you are shifting value out of the funding stream to something that otherwise is not getting funded to get built. And those things are catalysts for further economic development, which allows you to recover the tax exemption you otherwise provided. I'm not talking about corporate retention deals where somebody says, we're thinking about leaving New York to go to Plano, Texas, and then they get a tax exemption deal. I'm talking more about, how do you stimulate, how do you bring manufacturing into the South Bronx when private equity doesn't see a rate of return that's sufficient? Can a tax break on land costs, on long-term value, stimulate that kind of economic activity? I think it can.
Do you feel that we get our, that the balance sheet is in favor of the public good?
Not generally. I think we've seen too many examples where the tax exemptions are basically corporate giveaways in a kind of political way. And then I think they're also blunt instruments that, unless they're used well and thoughtfully, I'm not going to even get into it, but let's just say that whatever Governor Cuomo thought the 10 tall towers were going to be necessary, if that's not a blunt instrument to think about how Penn Station needs to get built, I don't know what is. So let's use tax exemptions and make sure they're thoughtful and get you what you in fact want, and not just shift money from the public sector into the private sector's pockets.
Yeah, because in the case that you're referring, Vornado, who is the majority landowner, will get a major tax exemption.
Yes, they would have gotten
40%.
Right, exactly. And are we saying that the neighborhood needs that New York is so undynamic financially that we have to grant a tax exemption for growth in and around 34th Street in Manhattan? I'm a little skeptical about that.
Yeah, it's silly.
Particularly 10, but let's also be clear, one of the things that caused a lot of consternation in the community was the perception that the condemnation of the southern blocks meant that Vornado, the company, was going to build 10 gigantic towers where the property was condemned. That would have been even worse. That would have been just a corporate giveaway. But that wasn't what Vornado and even Governor Cuomo was proposing.
Although they had the option to do it.
They had an option, but
they still have it, and they could very well use it, and they're very well positioned to be the ones who actually get their hand on this land. So,
but the 10 landing sites were not the southern blocks. That's all I'm trying to say.
No, they only have 8.
Right, exactly. It's a small point, but what I'm trying to get at is like, and I said this before. And let's build a city that we all want to live in. Let's not let money drive it. Let's not let tax exemptions, or even Madison Square Garden for that matter. Let's build a city that New Yorkers want to live in. What are the things that make a quality city for the next 100 years? That seems to me as a driving principle to sort of sift through some of these competing priorities and really go to the 34th Street community in and around. And there are a lot of landowners. There are a lot of property owners. There are a lot of people who would probably love to be part of a wonderful new, almost a charrette to reimagine on a variety of scales with different densities, different locations, with different mobility scheme. That's the city we want to be building, not letting one idea, a tax exemption to drive real estate is one thing, or we've got to have the garden be this thing. We're building a city, and let's build a city we want to live in.
Yeah, no, very good point. So that's the perfect segue for our next segment. We here at Carte Blanche love a good pole dancing session. And no, I am not talking about fancy footwork on a dance floor. Pole dancing is the segment when we talk about surveys and opinion polls. So Chris, let's cha-cha on some intriguing data. The Grand Penn Community Alliance actually commissioned a survey a couple of months ago. And one of the key findings is that, according to the survey, 73% of people support moving Madison Square Garden so that Penn Station can be upgraded.
I'd probably say the same thing if I lived in and around Madison Square Garden. I mean, let's acknowledge it's not exactly the most inspiring piece of urban architecture. The way it has to operate within the community with the trucks coming into the mid-block underneath the garden. So if someone said, would you like to see the garden move, and I was in that community, I'd say, yeah, get me something new and better that's beautiful, because I've been living with this thing for too long. I mean, we have to acknowledge it's just not a beautiful piece of architecture.
So what I found interesting, the respondents, I think they did, a very, thorough survey, like your correct sample, and people not only from the area, but the broader New York community. People love the garden. It is the most famous arena in the world, and it is, inspiring, and people are attached to the Knicks and the Rangers. I was surprised by the numbers. I thought that people would be so attached. We don't want to lose the garden, and
yeah. So I love those. This is why pole dancing is so good, because in a way, Leila, Time's arrow is pointing in two different directions at the same time there, and that's one of the problems for Penn Station. So, Greater New York, people who live in the Greater Penn District go, would I like to see the garden move? Yeah, I'd like to see the garden move. I'd like to see a big, new, beautiful garden. On the other hand, New Yorkers are the most loyal, are the most nostalgic, are the most steadfast. Rain, stuff falling around their head, garden collapsing, shitty service. I love the garden. We can't afford to lose the garden. The Knicks, we do not have dominant sports franchises playing there, and yet it's sold out all the time. So kudos to New Yorkers for, having that. But that's why Times Arrow is pointing in two different directions. I'd like to see a big, new, beautiful one, but boy, I love the garden.
I mean, you had to give it to the venue. When you're there on a basketball game, It is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no,
and
exactly.
yet, as you mentioned, the garden has moved already 4 times.
Yeah.
And it used to be on Madison Square Park,
Exactly.
which is why it's named Madison Square Park. So do people forget that the garden used to be elsewhere?
Oh, I think that's one of the things. New Yorkers have great nostalgia, but they're never historically accurate about their nostalgia. So, no, it's true. It's true. I mean, we love to think we know our past, and we talk about it all the time. And then when you really dig into it, people go, oh, I didn't really know that. Yeah. So, no, I mean, I think people think the garden's probably always been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us today on Carte Blanche. It has been an enlightening and engaging conversation with our esteemed guest, Chris Ward. We've delved deep into the world of Penn Station and rail infrastructure, uncovering insights that are crucial for our region's future. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Now, before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to stay connected with us on social media. You can find Carte Blanche on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We'll keep you updated on upcoming episodes and exciting behind-the-scenes moments. Your engagement and active participation are essential. Stay informed, ask questions, and let your voices be heard. Together, we can shape the future of our city and its infrastructure. Well, it's through discourse and action that we make progress. So, until next time, keep the dialogue going, and remember that here at Carte Blanche, the stage is always set for unscripted conversations. Signing off for now, this was Carte Blanche with Chris Ward. Have a fantastic evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila.
Thank you, Chris.